Welcome back. Today's story is different. It's about a kind of fear that doesn't announce itself with dark alleys or marked strangers. It's the fear that wears a familiar face, that shows up at your door with flowers, that calls itself love while tightening its grip around your life. The story is about a mother, a daughter, and a terrifying discovery that sometimes the people who say they are protecting you are the ones you need protection from. This story is going to stay. Let's begin.
The rain hammered against the windshield like accusations I couldn't answer. My daughter Zinc sat in the passenger seat, her small fingers tracing patterns in the fog on the window, creating tiny worlds that disappeared as quickly as they formed. She was 9 now, old enough to understand that silence sometimes meant more than words. "Mom," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Are we going to be okay?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her that everything was fine, that the world was safe, that mothers could protect their daughters from anything. Instead, I reached over and squeezed her hand, feeling how small it was in mine, how fragile. "We're going to fight," I told her. And sometimes that's the same thing as being okay. 3 weeks earlier, I had believed in normalcy. I had believed that grief had a timeline, that loss could be measured and managed like the medication schedules I dealt with at Mercy General Hospital. I was wrong about so many things back then. It started on a Tuesday evening at the old downtown library, one of those beautiful stone buildings that smelled like history and possibility. Zinc loved the children's section with its murals of fantastical creatures and reading nooks shaped like castle towers. We went there every Tuesday after my day shift, a routine we'd built from the wreckage of Indigo's death. Indigo Thorne had been my husband, my partner, the man who made terrible jokes while cooking elaborate meals and who sang off-key while doing dishes. He died on a wet November morning 2.5 years ago when a delivery truck ran a red light. One moment he was driving to his architecture firm. The next moment he was gone, and I was a widow at 32 with a 6-year-old daughter and a mortgage I could barely afford. The grief counselor said I was doing well. She used words like resilient and adaptive. What she meant was that I hadn't fallen apart in ways that required intervention. I went to work, I paid bills, I made sure Zinc ate vegetables and did her homework. I survived, which is different from living but similar enough that most people couldn't tell the difference. That Tuesday, Zinc was hunting for a book about deep-sea creatures while I browsed the mystery section, pretending I had time to read novels. That's when I noticed him. A man in his 40s, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that seemed out of place in a public library on a weeknight. He had dark hair threaded with silver, and he carried a leather messenger bag that looked like it cost more than my monthly car payment. But what caught my attention was how he was watching Zinc. Not casually. Not the way adults sometimes observe children with benign curiosity. This was focused, deliberate. He had a small camera in his hands, and as I watched, he raised it and took a photograph of my daughter as she reached for a book on the upper shelf. My nurse's instincts kicked in immediately, the same instincts that helped me spot a patient crashing before the monitors alarmed. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I moved quickly but quietly, positioning myself between the man and Zinc. He noticed me immediately, and for a brief moment our eyes met. He didn't look away. He didn't look embarrassed or caught. He simply lowered the camera with practiced ease and smiled, the kind of smile that was meant to be disarming but felt like a threat. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice level. "Why are you taking pictures of my daughter?" "Am I?" he replied smoothly, his voice educated and calm. "I'm a photography enthusiast. I was capturing the architecture of this beautiful building. If your daughter happened to be in frame, it was entirely incidental." The librarian, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned in a neat bun, looked over with concern. The man's smile widened slightly, and he made a show of putting his camera into his bag. "No harm intended," he said. "Beautiful child, by the way. You must be very proud." He walked away before I could respond, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Zinc came running up with 3 books clutched to her chest, oblivious to what had just happened. "Mom, can we get all of these?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. I forced myself to smile. Of course, sweetheart. But my hands shook as I checked out the books, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just been marked somehow, catalogued for purposes I didn't yet understand. That night, after Zinc fell asleep, I sat at our small kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. Our apartment was modest, a two-bedroom on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The walls were thin enough that I could hear our neighbor's television, and the heating was unreliable, but it was ours. Or at least, it would be ours once I finished paying off the mortgage that felt like a mountain I was climbing with my bare hands. The kitchen still had traces of indigo everywhere. The magnetic strip he'd installed to hold our knives. The herb garden starter kit on the windowsill that I kept alive out of stubborn love, even though I had no talent for growing things. The chalkboard wall where he used to leave silly drawings and love notes that made Zinc giggle. I missed him with an ache that had no cure, no medication I could prescribe myself. But tonight the missing felt different. Tonight I wished he was here not just because I loved him, but because I was scared, and I didn't know what to be scared of yet. My phone buzzed. A text from Flint Wraith, Indigo's younger brother. Hey Sable, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? Flint had become a constant presence in our lives since Indigo died. First, I was grateful. He helped with repairs around the apartment, took Zinc to the park when I worked double shifts, showed up with groceries when he knew I was too exhausted to shop. He was kind and attentive, and Zinc adored him. But lately something had shifted. His visits had become more frequent, more insistent. He knew things he shouldn't know, details about our schedule that I didn't remember sharing. He asked questions that felt less like concern and more like surveillance. I typed back, we're fine. Just tired. Talk soon. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Okay. Remember I'm here if you need anything. Anytime. I set the phone down and stared at Indigo's chalkboard. The last thing he'd drawn was still there, protected under a layer of fixative spray I'd applied in a moment of grief-stricken preservation. It was a simple sketch of the three of us holding hands, standing under a sun with an absurdly happy face. I don't know what's happening, I whispered to the drawing. But something's wrong, Indigo. Something's really wrong. The apartment creaked and settled around me, offering no answers. The next morning, I dropped Zinc off at Riverside Elementary and headed to the hospital for my shift. Mercy General was a sprawling complex that serviced half the city, and the emergency department where I worked was perpetually understaffed and overwhelmed. But I loved my job in a complicated way. When I was managing patient care, starting IVs, administering medications, and talking families through the worst moments of their lives, I couldn't think about my own problems. Work was the only place where my grief had to wait in line. My shift started at 7 a.m. and was supposed to end at 7 p.m., but we were short 2 nurses, so I knew I'd be lucky to leave by 8. I texted Marlo, our neighbor and Zinc's after-school guardian angel, to let her know I'd be late picking up Zinc. Marlo was in her 60s, a retired teacher with a warm smile and an endless supply of patience. She'd become essential to our survival, the kind of person who made life possible for single working mothers. She never made me feel guilty about the late pickups or the emergency calls, and Zinc loved her like a grandmother. The shift was brutal. We had 3 car accident victims, a heart attack, 2 overdoses, and a constant stream of patients with complaints ranging from genuine emergencies to profound loneliness disguised as medical need. By 3 p.m., I was running on coffee and adrenaline, moving from room to room with the efficiency of someone who had learned to function in crisis mode. During a rare lull, I checked my phone. 7 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemails. My stomach tightened with instinctive unease. I was about to call the number back when my colleague, Dr. Hassan, poked his head into the break room. Sable, we need you in trauma too. Multi-vehicle collision coming in eat a 3 minutes. I shoved my phone in my pocket and ran. The rest of the shift blurred into blood pressures, trauma protocols, and the organized chaos that defined emergency medicine. By the time I finally clocked out at 8:30 p.m., I was so exhausted I could barely remember driving to Marlowe's apartment. Zinc was asleep on Marlowe's couch, curled up under a knitted blanket with a book still clutched in her hands. Marlowe smiled at me over her reading glasses. "Long day?" she asked kindly. "The longest," I admitted. "Thank you for keeping her. I don't know what I'd do without you." Marlowe waved away my gratitude. "She's a delight, Sable. Always is." She hesitated, then added, "Though she seemed a bit anxious today. Kept asking when you'd get here." My exhaustion sharpened into concern. "Anxious how?" "Nothing specific. Just thoughtful. Like she was waiting for something." I gently woke Zinc, and she clung to me immediately, her small arms tight around my neck. "Mom," she whispered. "Can we go home now? Please." "Of course, baby. Let's go home." As we walked to our apartment, Zinc held my hand tighter than usual. The hallway was dim, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that the building manager kept promising to replace. Our door was at the end of the corridor, and as we approached, Zinc suddenly stopped. "Mom," she said quietly. "Someone was at our door." I looked down at her. "What do you mean?" "Earlier, when I was coming home from school with Marlowe, I saw someone standing at our door. A man." My blood went cold. "What did he look like?" Zinc's face scrunched up in concentration. "I don't know. He left before we got close. But he was wearing a dark suit. And he had a bag like the man at the library." I unlocked our door quickly, my heart pounding, and we went inside. Everything looked normal. Nothing was disturbed. But the air felt different somehow, like someone had been there, leaving behind an invisible residue of intrusion. I checked every room while Zinc watched from the doorway, her eyes wide. The windows were locked. Nothing was missing. But on the kitchen counter I found something that made my hands go numb. Business card. Plain white with elegant black lettering. Corvus Blackwell, Private Investigations and Surveillance, discretion guaranteed. There was no phone number, no address. Just a name and a promise of discretion that felt like a threat. I picked up the card with shaking hands, turning it over. On the back, written in neat cursive, was a single sentence. "Concerned parties are watching." Zinc came up beside me. "Mom, what is it?" I forced my voice to stay calm. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some junk mail." But I pocketed the card, and that night after Zinc fell asleep, I sat in her doorway watching her breathe, my phone in my hand, trying to decide who to call. The police. And tell them what? That a photographer had taken pictures in a public library. That someone had left a business card at my door. I had no proof of anything except a growing sense of dread that something terrible was circling my family, patient and inevitable as a shark. The following days felt like living under surveillance I couldn't prove existed. I started noticing things. A silver sedan that appeared behind us on the way to school 3 days in a row. A figure across the street from the hospital parking lot who seemed to be waiting but never moved. The feeling of being watched that raised the hair on the back of my neck every time Zinc and I left the apartment. I considered myself rational. I'd built my entire career on evidence-based practice, on observable symptoms and measurable interventions. But fear has its own logic, and mine was telling me to pay attention, to trust the instincts that had kept patients alive when protocols failed. Flint called every day, sometimes twice. His texts became more frequent, more insistent. He wanted to know our schedule when I was working, when Zinc had activities, whether we needed help with anything. His concern felt suffocating, like a weighted blanket that was too heavy to sleep under. On Friday evening, he showed up at our door unannounced. He had flowers, a bouquet of sunflowers that Zinc used to love when she was younger. Now she just looked at them with polite confusion. "Uncle Flint," she said quietly. "Hi." "Hey, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair in a gesture that made her flinch slightly. "I brought you something." He pulled out a small gift bag, and Zinc opened it to find a tablet, brand new and expensive. "For your schoolwork," Flint explained. "I know you've been using Sable's old laptop. This will be better." I started to protest. Flint, that's too much. Nonsense, he interrupted. Your family. Indigo would have wanted Zinc to have the best tools for learning. There it was again. Indigo's name deployed like justification for everything Flint did. I'd started to hate hearing my dead husband's name in his brother's mouth, twisted into permission for intrusions I never agreed to. Zinc took the tablet with a quiet thank you that lacked enthusiasm. Flint didn't seem to notice. He settled onto our couch like he planned to stay. So, he said casually, how was the library on Tuesday? I went very still. How did you know we went to the library? Flint laughed, but it sounded forced. Zinc mentioned it. Remember, kiddo? Zinc looked at me, then at Flint, confusion clear on her face. I didn't tell Uncle Flint about the library. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Flint's smile faltered. Must have been Marlowe then, he said quickly. I ran into her at the grocery store. But Marlowe didn't know about the library either. I hadn't told her. The only people who knew were Zinc and me, and the man with the camera. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your daughter's backpack. Main pocket. I stood up immediately. Excuse me for a moment. I went to where Zinc's backpack hung by the door and unzipped the main pocket. My hands found something hard and small, tucked into the interior seam where it would be difficult to notice. Pulled it out. A GPS tracking device. Small, black, sophisticated. The world tilted sideways. I walked back to the living room, holding the device in my palm like evidence of a crime I was still trying to name. Flint, I said quietly. Did you put this in Zinc's backpack? He stood up, his face going pale. What? What is that? A tracker, I said, my voice shaking with rage I could barely contain. Someone has been tracking my daughter. And you knew we went to the library on a day I didn't tell anyone about. Flint raised his hands defensively. Sable, I swear I didn't. Get out, I said. Please just let me explain. Get out of my apartment. Now. Zinc was crying silently, her small body trembling. Flint looked at her, then at me, his face crumbling. I was trying to help, he whispered. My mother, she was just worried. Everything clicked into place like a diagnosis I should have made weeks ago. Celestine Wraith. My mother-in-law. Indigo's mother. The woman who had smiled at me at Indigo's funeral and told me with absolute certainty that Zinc would need proper family to guide her through this difficult time. Your mother, I repeated slowly. Celestine hired someone to track us. Flint's silence was confirmation. How long? I demanded. How long has this been happening? I don't know all the details, Flint said miserably. She's worried about Zinc. She thinks you're overwhelmed, that you work too much, that Zinc needs more stability. So she hired a private investigator to stalk us? To track my daughter like she's a possession. She wants custody, Flint admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. She's been building a case. Evidence that you're an unfit mother. That Zinc would be better off with her. I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me. All the exhaustion and fear and grief of the past 2 years coalescing into a single point of absolute clarity. You need to leave, I said again, my voice deadly calm now. And you need to tell me everything you know. Every detail. Or I'm calling the police right now. Flint sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. And then, slowly he started talking. Celestine Wraith had always been a difficult woman to understand. She was elegant and educated, a retired literature professor who lived in a pristine condo in the upscale Riverside district. She collected first editions, hosted salon-style gatherings for her intellectual friends, and spoke multiple languages with the casual fluency of someone who considered knowledge a form of currency. When Indigo introduced me to her 8 years ago, she had looked at me like I was a curiosity she was still deciding whether to approve of. I was a nursing student from a working-class family, rough around the edges in ways she found simultaneously fascinating and concerning. But Indigo loved me, and eventually, Celestine learned to perform acceptance, even if genuine warmth never quite materialized. After Indigo died, Celestine's interest in zinc intensified. She wanted more time with her granddaughter, more input into her education, more involvement in decisions I considered mine to make. When I gently established boundaries, Celestine responded with hurt that felt performative, like I was being unreasonable by wanting to parent my own child. According to Flint, Celestine's campaign had started 6 months ago. She'd hired Corvus Blackwell, a private investigator who specialized in custody cases, to document my life. Every late shift at the hospital, every time Zinc stayed with Marlowe, every moment I looked tired or overwhelmed became evidence in a file that was building toward a singular goal, proving I was unfit to raise my own daughter. Corvus had been following us for months. The library, the grocery store, school pickups, park visits. He'd taken hundreds of photographs, documenting what Celestine called my chronic absence and inability to provide adequate supervision. The GPS tracker had been placed in Zinc's backpack 3 weeks ago, during a weekend visit to Celestine's condo. Zinc had left her backpack in the guest room, and when she retrieved it before leaving, the tracker was already hidden in the lining. Flint had known about some of it. Not all of it, he insisted. Celestine told him she was concerned about me, that she needed to understand the situation before offering help. She'd asked him to visit more often, to observe, to report back. He thought he was helping his family. He didn't realize he was participating in a surveillance operation designed to separate a child from her mother. She has lawyers, Flint said miserably. Good ones. She's been meeting with them for months. They told her she had a case if she could prove you were neglectful. I'm not neglectful, I said, my voice breaking. I work to keep a roof over our heads. I make sure Zinc is safe and loved and cared for. That's not neglect. That's survival. I know, Flint whispered. I know that now. But my mother, she sees what she wants to see. And she wants Zinc. Zinc had been listening from the corner where she'd retreated, her arms wrapped around her knees. Now she spoke, her voice small but clear. I don't want to live with Grandma Celestine. I want to stay with Mom. The simple statement broke something open in my chest. All the fear and exhaustion and rage transformed into determination so fierce it felt like steel in my spine. Flint, I said, you're going to help me fix this. You're going to tell me everything you know. Every meeting, every conversation, every piece of evidence Celestine has been collecting. And then you're going to help me stop her. He looked up at me, his eyes red. She's my mother. And Zinc is my daughter. Choose. Chose. Over the next 3 days, Flint and I mapped out everything he knew about Celestine's plan. He had access to some of her emails because they shared certain family accounts. He had been present at 2 meetings with her lawyer, a woman named Victoria Cross who specialized in high-conflict custody disputes. He knew about the file Corvus had been building, though he'd never seen its full contents. More importantly, he knew Celestine was planning to file for custody within the week. She wanted to move quickly, to catch me off guard before I could mount a defense. She believed surprise was her advantage. But now we had surprise on our side. I contacted a lawyer of my own, a woman named Diana Steele who came highly recommended by one of the social workers at the hospital. Diana was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for demolishing custody cases built on wealth and privilege rather than genuine concern for children's welfare. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. This is more common than you'd think, she said finally. Grandparents who believe money and stability trump a parent's love. The good news is that courts generally don't remove children from fit parents just because someone else has more resources. The bad news is that proving your fitness when someone is actively working to undermine you can be exhausting and expensive. I don't have money for expensive, I said bluntly. Diana nodded. I work on a sliding scale. We'll figure it out. But right now we need to address the immediate issue, the stalking. A private investigator doesn't have the right to place tracking devices on your daughter. That's illegal. We need to file a police report and get a restraining order against both Celestine and Corvus. That evening, Zink and I went to the police station. The officer who took our report was a woman named Sergeant Petra Quinn, who had tired eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every story. I showed her the GPS tracker, the business card Corvus had left, and the photographs I'd taken of the silver sedan that had been following us. "And your mother-in-law is behind this?" she asked, writing steadily. "According to my brother-in-law, yes. She's hired a private investigator to build a custody case against me." Sergeant Quinn's pen paused. To be clear, surveillance in public spaces is generally legal. Private investigators can take photographs in libraries, parks, and other public areas. However, placing a tracking device on a minor without parental consent crosses several lines. That's criminal. So what happens now? Yes. We'll open an investigation. I'll contact this Corvus Blackwell for questioning. Given the circumstances, I'd also recommend you file for a restraining order through the family court. It won't stop the custody petition, but it will restrict their access to your daughter while the legal process unfolds. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was something. It was action instead of fear. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. In the days leading up to it, Celestine tried to contact me repeatedly. Calls, texts, and emails expressing confusion and hurt. She claimed she had no idea what I was talking about, that there must be some misunderstanding, that she only wanted what was best for Zink. Diana told me not to respond. "Everything you say can be used against you. Let her talk to her lawyers. We'll talk to the judge." On Sunday night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me. Zink had crawled into my bed around midnight, something she hadn't done in months. She pressed against my side, her breathing eventually evening out into sleep while mine remained jagged with anxiety. I thought about Indigo, how he used to calm my spiral of worry with terrible jokes and gentle rationality. How he would have handled his mother with a combination of love and firmness I never quite mastered. How he would have protected us from this. But Indigo was gone, and I was alone in this fight except for Flint, who had surprised me by standing firm against his mother despite her increasingly desperate attempts to win him back to her side. The hearing was held in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and disappointment. Judge Ashford Kane presided, a stern-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested he'd long ago stopped being surprised by human behavior. Celestine attended with Victoria Cross, her lawyer. Celestine looked elegant and wounded, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief when she saw Zink sitting beside me, performing grief for an audience that included the judge, the court reporter, and the future that hung in the balance. Diana presented our case methodically. She submitted the GPS tracker as evidence, along with Corvus Blackwell's business card and the police report documenting the stalking. She had also obtained phone records showing the frequency of contact between Celestine and Corvus, as well as financial records proving Celestine had paid him over $15,000 over the past 6 months. Victoria Cross objected to nearly everything, arguing that we were making assumptions, that there was no direct evidence linking Celestine to the tracking device, that her client's concern for her granddaughter was being criminalized. Then Diana called Flint to testify. He walked to the stand looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he was sworn in, his hand trembled slightly on the Bible. Diana's questions were straightforward. Did he know his mother had hired a private investigator? Did he participate in providing information about my schedule? Did he place the GPS tracker in Zink's backpack? No, but he knew it was there because Celestine had told him about it. Victoria Cross tried to discredit him during cross-examination. "Mr. Wraith, isn't it true that you're romantically interested in your sister-in-law, and that this testimony is motivated by that interest rather than actual knowledge?" Flint's face flushed. "I've made mistakes," he said quietly. "But I'm here because I watched my mother try to take a child from a good mother, and I won't be part of that anymore." Judge Kane finally called Celestine to testify. She approached the stand with dignity, her performance of wounded grandmother flawless. Mrs. Wraith, Diana began. Did you hire Corvus Blackwell to surveil your daughter-in-law? I hired him to ensure my granddaughter's safety, Celestine replied, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. Sable works such long hours. I was concerned Zinc wasn't being properly supervised. So you hired a man to follow them, to photograph them without their knowledge. I needed to understand the situation before I could help. Help, Diana repeated. Or take custody. Celestine's composure cracked slightly. Zinc is all I have left of my son. I lost Indigo, and I cannot lose her too. If Sable cannot provide adequate care. Adequate care, Diana interrupted. Or care that meets your standards. Mrs. Wraith, isn't it true that you've been meeting with custody lawyers for months? That you've been building a case to remove Zinc from her mother? I've been protecting my granddaughter, Celestine insisted. By stalking her. By placing tracking devices on a 9-year-old child. I never, Celestine started, but her lawyer touched her arm, silencing her. The hearing lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Judge Kane announced he would issue his ruling within 24 hours. We left the courtroom in silence, Celestine and her lawyer going one direction while Zinc, Flint, Diana, and I went another. Side Zinc looked up at me. Did we win? I don't know yet, baby. But we fought. And that matters. Judge Kane issued a temporary restraining order the next day. Celestine was prohibited from contacting Zinc directly or approaching within 500 feet of our apartment, Zinc's school, or any location where we could reasonably be expected to be. All future contact would have to be supervised and arranged through the court. The order also mandated that Corvus Blackwell cease all surveillance activities and surrender any photographs, video recordings, or documents he had collected about us to the court for review. Diana called to tell me the news. It's not permanent, she warned. Celestine can petition for supervised visitation, and she'll likely continue pursuing some form of custody arrangement. But for now, you have breathing room. That breathing room felt like oxygen after drowning. Zinc seemed lighter that week, laughing more easily, sleeping through the night without crawling into my bed. We went to the park on my day off, and she played on the swings while I watched, alert for any sign of Corvus or Celestine but finally able to imagine a future where surveillance wasn't the baseline of our existence. Flint visited once, bringing Chinese takeout and asking permission before he even stepped inside. We ate together, the three of us, and for the first time in months, the silence between us felt comfortable rather than loaded with unspoken tensions. My mother's not speaking to me, Flint said eventually. She thinks I betrayed the family. You protected your niece, I replied. That's the opposite of betrayal. He nodded but didn't look convinced. I keep thinking about all the times I should have questioned what she was doing. All the times I chose to believe her instead of listening to my own doubts. Guilt is easy, I said. Changing is harder. You're doing the harder thing now. Zinc reached over and took his hand. Uncle Flint, are you going to keep visiting us? He looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. If your mom says it's okay, I'd like to. But only when you both want me here. I want you here, Zinc said simply. I wanted to be more cautious, to protect us from further disappointment. But Zinc's certainty reminded me that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was a choice to believe people could change. You can visit, I said. But Flint, if you ever. I know, he interrupted. And I won't. I promise. Corvus Blackwell was more difficult to deal with than expected. He refused to surrender the complete file he'd compiled on us, claiming attorney-client privilege and confidentiality agreements with Celestine. It took a court order and the threat of criminal charges before he finally complied. When Diana received the file, she called me immediately. Sable, you need to see this. Can you come to my office? I arranged for Marlowe to watch Zinc and drove to Diana's office in the business district downtown. Her office was small but professional, with law books lining the walls and a view of the river that probably cost more in rent than she admitted. She handed me a thick folder. "This is everything Corvus collected. I've reviewed it, and there's nothing here that proves you're unfit. If anything, it proves the opposite." I opened the folder. Inside were hundreds of photographs. Me holding Zink's hand as we crossed the street. Me reading to her at the library. Me helping her with homework at the kitchen table. Me watching her at the playground, my face soft with a love I didn't realize showed so clearly. There were also notes, detailed observations of our routines. Subject works 12-hour shifts at Mercy General Hospital. Daughter attends Riverside Elementary. Maintains good grades. Subject ensures daughter is supervised at all times when she cannot be present. Daughter appears healthy, well cared for, and happy. "He couldn't find anything," Diana said. "Because there's nothing to find. You're a good mother, Sable. Even Celestine's paid investigator couldn't prove otherwise." I stared at the photographs, seeing my life through a stranger's lens. All the moments I'd worried I was failing, that I wasn't enough, that Zink deserved better, captured and documented as evidence of the opposite. What happens now? Yes. Now we wait. Celestine will likely file her custody petition anyway. Some people can't let go even when they've already lost. But when she does, we'll be ready. We have documentation that she engaged in illegal surveillance. We have testimony from her own son about her motivations. And we have these photographs that prove what any reasonable person can see. You're exactly the parent Zink needs. I left Diana's office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Celestine filed her custody petition 3 weeks later, as Diana predicted. The case was assigned to family court, with a full hearing scheduled for 2 months out. In the meantime, the temporary restraining order remained in effect, and Celestine was granted supervised visitation with Zink for 2 hours every other Saturday at a court-approved facility. The first visitation was heartbreaking. Zink clung to me at the entrance to the visitation center, her small body tense with anxiety. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "I know, baby. But it's only for a little while. And someone will be there the whole time to make sure you're safe." The supervisor was a woman named Iris Chen, kind-faced and professional. She gently encouraged Zink to come inside, promising that I would be waiting right outside the door. Through the observation window, I watched Celestine attempt to connect with Zink. She'd brought gifts, expensive toys and books that Zink accepted politely but without enthusiasm. Celestine tried to hug her, but Zink remained stiff, her arms at her sides. They sat at a table, and Celestine talked while Zink listened with the patient tolerance of a child who'd learned not to contradict adults. After an hour, Zink asked if she could leave. Iris gently reminded her she needed to stay for another hour. When the visitation ended, Zink ran to me and buried her face in my stomach. "I don't like it there," she said, her voice muffled. "I know. I'm so proud of you for being brave." In the car, Zink was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Grandma Celestine told me she could give me a better life. A bigger house and better schools and more things. She said you work too much and that I'm alone too much." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you say?" "I said I don't care about bigger houses. I want to be with you." I had to pull over because the tears came too fast for safe driving. Zink unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed into the front seat, wrapping her arms around me. "Mom, don't cry. We're going to be okay. You said we'd fight, and we are." Out of the mouths of children comes wisdom that makes adults realize how little they know. My 9-year-old daughter was teaching me about resilience. The custody hearing arrived on a gray morning in late September. The courtroom was larger this time, with wooden benches for observers and a raised bench where Judge Kane would preside. Celestine sat with Victoria Cross, her expression composed but her hands betraying her anxiety with small, repetitive movements. Diana had prepared me thoroughly. She explained the process, the questions I might face, the strategy Victoria would likely employ to make me appear overwhelmed and inadequate. "Remember," Diana said, "you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be good enough. And you're more than good enough. The hearing began with opening statements. Victoria painted a picture of Celestine as a devoted grandmother with the resources and stability to provide Zinc with opportunities one couldn't match. She emphasized my long work hours, my reliance on neighbors for childcare, the modest apartment we lived in. Diana countered with the reality of modern single parenthood. She talked about my dedication to both my work and my daughter, the strong support system I'd built, and most importantly, Zinc's clear preference to remain with me. Celestine testified first. She was polished and articulate, describing her love for Zinc and her concern about my ability to provide adequate attention. She admitted to hiring Corvus but framed it as necessary due diligence, not stalking. "I've lost my son," she said, her voice breaking strategically. "I cannot lose my granddaughter to neglect, even if that neglect is unintentional." During cross-examination, Diana was surgical. "Mrs. Wraith, you testified that you were concerned about neglect. Can you provide specific examples of times when Zinc was neglected?" Celestine hesitated. "She's often with the neighbor instead of her mother. The neighbor being Marlo Hayes, a retired teacher who provides excellent care?" "Yes, but a child should be with their parent." "Mrs. Wraith, when your son Indigo was growing up, did you work?" "I was a professor, yes." "And did your children attend after-school programs and have babysitters while you worked?" Celestine's expression tightened. "That was different." "How so?" "I had a husband. A stable home. So your objection isn't really about neglect. It's about Sable being a single mother." Victoria objected, but the point had been made. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth. I talked about the crushing exhaustion of working 12-hour shifts while raising a child alone. I talked about the fear of not being enough, the constant worry that I was failing Indigo's memory. I talked about Zinc's strength and resilience, her kindness and intelligence, and how proud I was to be her mother. "Ms. Vesper," Victoria said during cross-examination, "you work night shifts sometimes, correct?" "Yes, as needed." "And during those times, your daughter sleeps at the neighbor's apartment." "Zinc stays with Marlo when I work nights, yes. She's known Marlo since she was 6. It's a safe, familiar environment." "Wouldn't it be better for Zinc to have a consistent home environment with a family member rather than a neighbor?" "Marlo is family," I said firmly. "Family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up." The final testimony came from Iris Chen, the visitation supervisor. She described the awkward, strained interactions between Celestine and Zinc during their supervised visits. "In my professional opinion," Iris said, "the child shows no desire for increased contact with the grandmother. She's polite but detached. In contrast, her bond with her mother is strong and healthy. Removing her from her mother's care would cause significant emotional harm." Judge Kane called a recess before making his ruling. We sat in the hallway, Diana reviewing her notes while I tried to breathe normally. Flint had come to the hearing despite knowing it would further alienate him from Celestine. He sat beside me, silent support in human form. When we were called back, Judge Kane spoke for 20 minutes. He discussed the law, the standards for custody modification, the importance of a child's established bonds. Then he delivered his ruling. The court finds no evidence of neglect or unfitness on the part of Sable Vesper. While Celestine Wraith's concerns may stem from genuine love for her granddaughter, love alone does not justify removing a child from a capable parent. The petition for custody is denied. The existing temporary restraining order will be modified to allow supervised visitation to continue at the grandmother's request, but primary custody remains with Ms. Vesper. I couldn't hear anything after that over the sound of my own heartbeat. Zinc, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom with Marlo, ran to me as soon as the judge finished speaking. "We won," she asked. "We won," I confirmed. She threw her arms around me, and I held her while Diana shook my hand and Flint smiled with relief and Celestine sat motionless, her perfect composure finally, completely shattered. The months that followed were a process of rebuilding. Celestine stopped requesting supervised visitations after the third one, when Zinc asked directly if they could stop because she didn't enjoy them. Iris reported the conversation to the court, and Judge Kane approved Zinc's request, noting that forcing a child to maintain contact with a grandparent against her will serve no one's interest. Celestine sent one final letter, delivered through her lawyer to avoid violating the restraining order. It was long and filled with justifications and recriminations, but the core message was simple. She believed she was right, and she would never accept the court's decision as just. Diana advised me to keep the letter but not respond. Some people can't be reached, she said. Your job isn't to make her understand. It's to protect your daughter. Flint continued to visit regularly. The awkwardness gradually faded, replaced by genuine connection. He taught Zinc how to play chess and took her to art museums on Saturday afternoons. He never tried to replace Indigo, but he carved out his own space in our lives, one defined by respect and patience rather than possession. One evening, after Zinc was asleep, Flint and I sat on the apartment balcony drinking tea and watching the city lights. "Do you ever forgive me completely?" he asked quietly. I considered the question. "I think forgiveness is ongoing," I said. "Like grief. You don't finish it once and move on. You keep choosing it. And do you choose it with me?" I looked at him, seeing not Indigo's brother or Celestine's son, but just Flint, complicated and flawed and trying. "Yes," I said. "I choose it." A year later, on a bright Saturday in October, we scattered some of Indigo's ashes at the lake where he'd proposed to me. It was a small ceremony, just Zinc, Flint, Marlowe, and me. We said our own prayers and shared our own memories, and then we let the wind take the ashes across the water. Zinc held my hand tightly. "Is Dad really in heaven, Mom?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think he's wherever love goes when the person carrying it dies. Which means he's here, in us." She seemed satisfied with that answer. As we walked back to the car, Zinc asked, "Can we get ice cream?" "Absolutely," I said. At the ice cream shop, Zinc got mint chocolate chip, her favorite. Flint got butter pecan. Marlowe got vanilla with extra sprinkles. I got coffee because some habits don't change. We sat at a picnic table outside, eating our ice cream while the autumn sun warmed our faces. Zinc chattered about school, about her friend Jasper who was teaching her to code, about the science fair project she wanted to do on ocean ecosystems. I watched her talk, animated and confident, and thought about all the ways we could have broken. The stalking, the surveillance, the custody battle, the grief that still occasionally knocked me sideways without warning. We could have shattered into pieces too small to reassemble. But we didn't. We fought. We survived. We kept choosing each other, kept building a life that wasn't perfect but was ours. That night, after Zinc fell asleep, I stood in her doorway watching her breathe, this impossible small person who had taught me about courage. On the wall above her bed was a new drawing, one I'd done last week in a moment of unexpected creativity. It showed 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun, with a 4th figure sketched lightly in the background, present but not demanding. Indigo was still with us, in the stories we told and the love we carried. But we were also learning to live in the present, to make new memories that honored the past without being trapped by it. My phone buzzed. A text from Diana. "Hope you're doing well. Remember you're stronger than you think." I smiled and typed back. "We're good. Finally, we're good." And for the first time in 3 years I believed it. 2 years after the custody battle ended, something unexpected happened. Celestine reached out through her lawyer, requesting a meeting. Not a legal meeting. Personal one. I discussed it with Diana first. "You don't owe her anything," Diana said. "But if you're curious, I can be there." I was curious. Not because I wanted reconciliation exactly, but because I wondered what Celestine wanted after 2 years of silence. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Celestine looked older, her elegant composure worn at the edges. She ordered tea but didn't drink it. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly. Waited. "I've been in therapy," she continued. "Not court-ordered. By choice. I've been trying to understand why I did what I did. The surveillance, the custody petition, all of it. And, asked, keeping my voice neutral. Celestine's hands trembled slightly around her teacup. I was trying to hold on to my son by controlling his daughter. I thought if I could just keep Zinc close, I wouldn't have lost him completely. But I understand now that what I did was about my grief, not about Zinc's well-being. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. I don't expect forgiveness, Celestine said. I don't even know if I deserve to ask for it. But I wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. You're a good mother. Zinc is lucky to have you. The words hung in the air between us, fragile and insufficient. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But words don't undo what happened. Zinc had nightmares for months. She was afraid of strangers, afraid of being taken. That fear is what your actions created. Celestine nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I'm so sorry. We sat in silence for a while. Eventually I said, I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again. But I can acknowledge that you're trying to change. That matters for something. Is there any chance, Celestine asked hesitantly, that I could see Zinc? Not supervised visitation. Just a lunch, perhaps. With you there. Thought about it. I'll ask her. She wants to see you, we can arrange something. But if she says no, you have to respect that. I will, Celestine promised. That evening I talked to Zinc about it. She was 11 now, taller and more self-assured, with opinions about everything from politics to pizza toppings. Grandma Celestine wants to have lunch with us, I said. Just the three of us. But only if you want to. Zinc was quiet for a long time. Will she try to take me away again? No, I said firmly. I won't let that happen. And legally she can't. This would just be lunch. Why does she want to? Zinc asked. I think she's trying to make things right. Or as right as they can be. Zinc considered this. Can I think about it? Of course. A week later, Zinc told me she'd decided to have lunch with Celestine. But just once, she said. To see if she's really different. We met at a family restaurant, the kind with crayons for kids and massive portions. Celestine arrived early, nervous in a way I'd never seen her. When Zinc walked in, Celestine's face transformed with emotion. Hi, Zinc, she said softly. Hi, Grandma, Zinc replied, polite but cautious. The lunch was awkward but not hostile. Celestine asked about school, and Zinc talked about her interest in marine biology. Celestine listened without trying to direct or control the conversation, which was new for her. As we were leaving, Celestine handed Zinc a small package. I found this in storage. It was your father's when he was your age. I thought you might like to have it. Zinc opened it carefully. Inside was a journal, leather-bound and worn, filled with Indigo's childhood drawings and observations about the world. Thank you, Zinc said, and for the first time she smiled at Celestine. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even reconciliation. But it was a door left slightly open, which was more than either of them had a year ago. On Zinc's 12th birthday, we had a party at our apartment. Marlowe made her famous chocolate cake. Flint brought presents and helped string up decorations. A few of Zinc's friends from school came, filling our modest space with laughter and chaos. At one point Zinc pulled me aside. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think Dad would be proud of us? I pulled her close. I think he'd be amazed by you. And I think he'd be glad we survived. Do you still miss him? Every day, I said honestly. But missing him doesn't mean we can't be happy. Both things can be true at the same time. Zinc nodded, satisfied. Then she went back to her friends, leaving me standing in the kitchen with tears in my eyes and gratitude in my heart. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Zinc was asleep, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and Indigo's journal. I'd been reading it slowly, savoring his childhood perspective on the world. One entry, written when he was 10, said, I think being brave means being scared but doing the thing anyway. Mom says I should try out for the school play even though I'm nervous. So I'm going to do it. Because being brave is important. I traced the words with my finger, imagining Indigo as a child, already learning the lessons I was still trying to master. My phone buzzed. A text from Flint. Thanks for today. Zinc seemed really happy. I typed back. She was. Thank you for being here. Always, he replied. I looked out at the city lights, thinking about the distance we'd traveled from that terrifying day in the library when everything started unraveling. We'd been through surveillance and betrayal, legal battles and emotional warfare. We'd faced the possibility of losing everything and had somehow emerged intact. Not unchanged. Never unchanged. But intact. The next morning was Sunday, our sacred day. Zinc and I made pancakes together, the kitchen filling with a smell of butter and vanilla. We ate at the small table by the window, sunlight streaming in and turning everything golden. What should we do today? Zinc asked. Whatever you want, I said. He grinned. Let's go to the aquarium. I want to see the jellyfish. So we went to the aquarium, and we stood in front of the jellyfish tank watching those impossible creatures drift through the water, glowing and ethereal. Zinc pressed her face against the glass, transfixed. They're so beautiful, she whispered. And they don't even have brains. They just exist and float and glow. Sometimes that's enough, I said. Just existing and glowing. She looked up at me. Are we like jellyfish, Mom? I laughed. In what way? We just keep going even when it's hard. We glow anyway. Out of the mouths of children comes poetry. Yes, I said. I guess we are like jellyfish. We glow anyway. 5 years after the custody battle, Zinc graduated middle school with honors. She'd grown into a thoughtful, articulate young woman with a passion for environmental science and a wicked sense of humor. She still had moments of anxiety, remnants of the trauma we'd lived through, but she'd learned to manage them with the help of a therapist and her own remarkable resilience. Flint and I had become something unexpected, partners. Not romantically, though there were moments when that possibility flickered between us like a question neither of us was quite ready to answer. But partners in parenting, in surviving, in building a life that honored Indigo's memory while making space for new joy. Celestine attended Zinc's graduation, sitting in the back row by her own choice. Afterward, Zinc hugged her briefly, a gesture of peace if not intimacy. They'd found an equilibrium over the years, a distant but civil relationship that satisfied no one completely but hurt no one actively. At the graduation party, Marlowe gave a toast. To Zinc, she said, raising her glass. Who taught us all that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about healing and growing anyway. Everyone raised their glasses, and Zinc blushed with pleasure and embarrassment. Later, as I was cleaning up, Diana called. We still spoke occasionally, our relationship having evolved from lawyer-client to something resembling friendship. I saw Zinc's graduation photos on social media, Diana said. She looks so grown up. She is, I said. I can't believe how fast time went. How are you doing? Diana asked. Really? I thought about the question. I'm good, I said. We're good. It's not perfect, but it's ours. That's all any of us can ask for, Diana said. You should be proud, Sable. What you built after everything you went through, that's remarkable. After we hung up, I stood in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the debris of celebration. Zinc was at a friend's house for a sleepover. Flint had gone home. Marlowe had left an hour ago. I was alone with my thoughts and the ghost of Indigo that still lingered in the corners of our lives. I picked up one of Indigo's old photographs from the bookshelf, one taken at the lake where we'd scattered his ashes. He was laughing in the photo, his face open and joyful, caught in a moment of pure happiness. We made it, I whispered to the photograph. We didn't always know if we would, but we made it. The apartment didn't answer, but somehow I felt like Indigo heard me anyway. The final chapter of this story doesn't have a neat ending because life doesn't work that way. We continued. Zinc went to high school. I kept working at the hospital, eventually moving into a supervisory role that offered better hours and slightly better pay. Flint remained a constant presence, the uncle who showed up for school events and family dinners, who knew when to give advice and when to just listen. Celestine and I never became close, but we reached a détente. She attended major events in Zinc's life, always respectful of boundaries, always careful not to overstep. She'd learned, finally, that love didn't mean control. The surveillance, the stalking, the custody battle, they became part of our history rather than our present. Zinc talked about it sometimes, processing it in layers as she grew older and understood more about what had happened. She wrote an essay about it for school once, titled, "The Year Someone Tried to Take Me." She got an A and read it aloud at an assembly on resilience. Years later, when Zinc was in college studying marine biology, she called me late one night. "Mom," she said, "I was thinking about Grandma Celestine. About everything that happened." "What about it?" I asked. "Do you think she really believed she was helping? Or did she know what she was doing was wrong?" I considered the question carefully. I think she believed she was helping. People can convince themselves that control is the same as care, that taking over someone's life is the same as saving it. That doesn't make what she did right, but it might make it understandable. "Do you forgive her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days yes, some days no. Forgiveness is complicated." "Yeah," Zinc said softly. "It really is." We talked for another hour about everything and nothing, the way mothers and daughters do when distance makes every conversation precious. When we hung up, I sat in the dark living room of the apartment we still lived in, thinking about the long journey from terror to peace. The tracking device was long gone, destroyed years ago. Corvus Blackwell had lost his investigator's license and moved to another state. Celestine was elderly now, quieter, diminished by age and perhaps by regret. Flint had remarried, a kind woman who worked as a librarian and who treated Zinc with warmth. And me. I was still standing, still fighting, still loving my daughter with the fierce protectiveness that had carried us through the darkest days. The apartment was quiet except for the usual city sounds drifting through the windows. I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table where Zinc and I had eaten 1,000 meals, where we'd done homework and made plans and survived. On the chalkboard wall, now mostly unused, I picked up a piece of chalk and wrote, "We glow anyway." Simple words for a complicated truth. That despite everything, the surveillance, the fear, the grief, the battles, we had chosen to keep going, to keep glowing. And that, in the end, was enough. 10 years after the custody battle, I received a letter from Celestine. She was dying, the letter explained, and she wanted to see Zinc one last time if Zinc was willing. I called Zinc, who was working on her PhD in marine conservation. She was hesitant but ultimately agreed. We visited Celestine together at the hospice facility where she was spending her final days. She looked small in the hospital bed, her elegant poise finally stripped away by mortality. "Zinc," she whispered when we entered. "Thank you for coming." Zinc sat beside the bed. "Hi, Grandma." They talked for an hour while I waited in the hallway. I don't know what they said to each other. Zinc never told me all of it and I never asked. But when she emerged, her eyes were red from crying. "She apologized," Zinc said. "Really apologized. She said she'd spent years in therapy understanding why she did what she did, and she wanted me to know that it was never about me being inadequate. It was about her fear of loss." "How do you feel?" I asked. "Sad," Zinc said. "But also lighter somehow. Like I can finally let it go." Celestine died 3 days later. Her funeral was small and dignified. Flint delivered the eulogy, speaking honestly about his mother's strengths and failures, her intelligence and her controlling nature, her capacity for love that sometimes manifested as suffocation. At the reception afterward, Zinc found me standing alone near the window. "Mom," she said, "I know this is weird, but I'm glad we went through what we went through." I looked at her surprised. "Why?" "Because it taught me that being loved doesn't mean being owned. That I have the right to my own life, my own choices. That you can survive terrible things and still be whole. You pause. You taught me that. By fighting for us. I hugged her tightly, this remarkable person my daughter had become, and thought about all the ways trauma can break us or reshape us into something stronger. I love you, I said. I love you too, she replied. Always. We stood there together as the afternoon light streamed through the windows, two survivors of a battle that had tested everything we were and had somehow emerged not destroyed but transformed. And that, finally, was the ending. Not perfect, not painless, but real. We had glowed anyway. We always would.